Welcome to Justice in Scrubs, where we explore the intersection between medicine and the law. I am Dr. Jeff Michaelis, my co-host.
Attorney Richard Hastings.
And we have a very, very special guest today, Dr. Marty Williams.
Before we dive in, it's important to remember that the information we provide is for informational purposes only. Every situation is unique, and decisions regarding your health or legal matters should be made after consulting with your own doctor or lawyer. Our aim is to inform and empower, but personal circumstances require personalized advice. We'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsor, findagreatattorney.com. If you or a loved one has been injured in an accident, finding the right lawyer can make all the difference in getting the compensation and support you deserve. That's where findagreatattorney.com comes in. They're a free lawyer referral service that connects accident and injury victims with the best attorneys in their area. With findagreatattorney.com, you can be confident that you're getting a highly qualified and experienced lawyer who will fight for your rights. The best part? Their service is completely free. So you have nothing to lose and everything to gain. If you're in need of legal assistance, head over to findagreatattorney.com and let them help you find one of the best lawyers in your area for your case.
Dr. Marty Williams and I were in practice together in the same medical community for over 30 years. And Dr. Williams is not only very experienced, he's one of the most respected internists in our community.
Thank you for that.
You're welcome. It's true. Today we're going to discuss with Dr. Williams a significant personal challenge that he had with an opioid addiction in the family. So, Dr. Williams, tell us a brief overview of your career as an internist.
Sure. To start with, I just want to tell everybody that I am not an expert in addiction medicine. I have no formal training in addiction medicine. I'm not a psychiatrist, but the experiences that I'll relate and my opinions are from personal experiences and also my experiences as an internist dealing with people with similar problems. So I went to medical school in Belgium, actually, and graduated in 1979. From 1979 to 1982, I did my residency at Danbury Hospital, and then I opened up private practice in Danbury. Soon I was joined by my ex-wife, and our practice actually flourished. And over the years, we grew, and at one point, we had 12 providers. So we had a very successful practice. I must say that for the first 20 years of my practice, I loved it. It was like exactly what I wanted to do. I was practicing medicine. I was helping people. For the last 20 years, insurance problems, administration problems, government regulations, everything every year seemed to be more and more issues. So I must say the last 20 years was not quite as rewarding to me personally as it was the first 20 years. I still enjoyed practicing medicine with the patients, but the other stuff became more and more burdensome. So last year I decided, after 41 years, to sell my practice, and I retired shortly thereafter, about 6 months after I sold my practice. So,
okay, let's start talking about your son. How did your son's addiction journey begin, and what were the early signs?
Yeah, so my son was a totally normal kid, born in 1983. At that time, I had a daughter who was a year and a half older than him, my wife, and we had a normal family. He loved baseball. He loved basketball. We skied together. We were extremely, extremely close up until probably, when he was 15 or 16. And retrospectively, I found out that when he was about age 13, 14, he started drinking. It was beer mostly. Somehow he would go to a friend's house. They would go out in the backyard, in the woods. Somebody would get beer for him, maybe an older sibling, and he would get drunk. But he never came home drunk, as far as I could tell. But then over the next few years, the drinking was combined with smoking marijuana. Then he started getting into pills, opioids, and also some benzos. And eventually, by the time he was 16 years old, he was hooked on OxyContin, which was about 1998. And that was before the whole OxyContin epidemic was really known. This was at the very beginning of the OxyContin epidemic. But OxyContin basically is a very, very strong opioid. And while it's not morphine and it's not heroin, and he didn't shoot up, but he snorted it. And snorting OxyContin is the equivalent of shooting up heroin, basically. It's a very strong opioid. It was made originally to be time-released, but when you burn it and snort it, that time-released goes away, and you get that immediate rush from the OxyContin. So at about 16, he was heavily into addiction at that point.
Now, we had talked earlier about the fact that we all know somebody who's been through your journey. Their child, their sibling, one of their loved ones has a problem with addictions, with opioids. And fortunately, I'll kind of jump to the end of this. This has a happy ending, as opposed to many people that we know that their children are not as fortunate. And it's interesting that there's a theme, and that is you have these caring, loving, giving, supportive parents that provide a wonderful, home life for their children. And then all of a sudden they just kind of take a bend in the road and go sideways.
Yeah.
And many people in your situation, as I'm sure you would say, are of the opinion that I didn't see this coming, or I didn't think that was going on in my house.
Right.
And I think it's important for people to realize that regardless of your socioeconomic status, your race, your religion, your age, that this is so prevalent. And maybe you can kind of talk to how this evidenced itself in your son's behavior and what the thought process that you had as you were experiencing this.
Yes. I mean, I think you're 100% right. And I think what happens to parents, especially if everything has been going smoothly up until that point, you're kind of in denial. It's like, okay, well, that happens to them. That doesn't happen to my son or my daughter. It's somebody else's problem. And I think it's hard for parents to accept the fact that, okay, maybe we have a problem, and you kind of are in denial. But in my son's case, he became more aloof. I mean, I think, I told you that we were very, very close, and all of a sudden he became more and more aloof, more defiant, more argumentative. We started having arguments about stupid things, and I just kind of at first thought it was just teenage behavior, normal. Okay, he's going through these adolescent period. But it became clear to me and my ex-wife that it was more than that after several episodes where he was clearly impaired, and we sought help at that point. I remember at that point we had gone to a bat mitzvah of one of my nieces, and he went and got a bottle of wine and left the party and just drank the whole bottle of wine by himself.
Wow.
And we went to get him, and he couldn't stand up. And we were very upset. But that was kind of like, at that moment in time, was, okay, this kid has a problem, and we need to address it.
So did you start to see things unfold with him? Like, did he become a truant at school? Did his grades suffer? Did he stop playing sports? Did he stop, playing the guitar or anything like that?
Never. That was the difficult part of it. He did great in school. Teachers never had a problem with it. He complained occasionally about this teacher. She doesn't know what she's talking about, but, he was probably right. But no, he never had a problem in school, and he never really was not able to function. So he was one of these very slick addicts who were able to function in their daily life. So no, it wasn't like, okay, all of a sudden he was flunking school or anything. He always did very well in school. So he was able to hide that. He was very slick in that way. He was very slick.
So this was literally a situation where you didn't see it coming. It's not like, you're getting calls from the school. Why isn't he in school today? Or his grades go from a B+ to an F.
Never.
Or, he starts having, friends over the house that there are challenges with.
Well, I mean, I think, yes, we did have some friends over to the house that I didn't know very well, so that maybe was kind of a hint. But aside from that, there was no problem in school. And unbeknownst to me, he had been stopped by the police in Newtown several times, but they never gave him a ticket. They gave him warnings, which retrospectively they probably shouldn't have. They probably should have given him tickets. And he did have a couple of fender benders during this period of time, but there was always an explanation what happened. He was a young driver, whatever. But those were the only kind of hints, perhaps, that retrospectively, yeah, it would be obvious, but at the time it wasn't so obvious.
But that's not unusual.
It's not unusual.
What
no.
you described are not unusual.
No, exactly. So how many kids have automobile accidents when they first start driving? My daughter had one. It wasn't her fault, but she also had one. So it's not that unusual.
So this starts at about 13 or so?
That he started,
right.
We didn't really realize a problem until he was about 15 or 16.
So could you walk us through a day in the life of your family?
So after that episode at the bat mitzvah, we said, okay, this has got to stop. So we basically, with some difficulty, I'm sure, convinced him that he had a problem. He probably said, yeah, and was probably just trying to, ease the conversation. And we got him enrolled in an outpatient adolescent program in Danbury for people with substance use disorder, alcohol and problems like that. And he went to that program, I think 3 times a week after school. He was still in school, and he did well. And, he was talking at meetings and everything. And, as I said, he's very slick, and he knows how to play the game. And then one day he goes in, and they have to do a urine drug screen. And he refused. So once you refuse, they kick you out of the program. Obviously, you have a problem. So the director of the program told us that he had a serious problem, she thought, which we said, well, come on, he's not that bad. But he said, I think he has a serious problem. He should go to an inpatient rehab. And that was about maybe in May of 2001, maybe April, May 2001. And he was like 2 months from graduating from high school. And that was one thing. We said, we're not going to put him in a rehab. He's not going to graduate from high school. And he also talked us out of it, saying, listen, I don't have that bad a problem. I just smoked a little bit of weed, and, I'm okay. I'm not going to do it anymore. And so he convinced us at that point that he was going to be good, and he went to meetings, AA meetings at that point, and we thought things were okay. But then there was a couple of episodes where clearly he was more impaired, or he was impaired again. And then one morning, we got the call that no parent ever wants to get. The Newtown police called us at 5 o'clock on a Saturday morning, 5 a.m. Saturday morning, and said they found my son's car wrapped around a tree in a back street in Newtown. The windshield was broken. There was blood everywhere. The car was totaled, but they didn't know where my son was.
Oh, my God.
They had no idea where he was. So my ex-wife started frantically calling his friends to find out if they knew where he was. I immediately went to the scene of the accident, and by the time I got to the scene of the accident, it was in Sandy Hook, the police had found him. He had gone. Somehow he must have called somebody, and a friend drove him and the other young man who was with him to the local Dunkin' Donuts. And so these two kids walk into Dunkin' Donuts, blood everywhere, totally, impaired. He had lost his two front teeth. He was talking on a cell phone that he didn't have. He was just talking like this. So clearly they knew he had a problem. And the police, I don't know why they did this. They brought him back to the scene of the accident, where they should have just brought him to the hospital because he clearly was, in an automobile accident. So they brought him back to the scene of the accident, and then we brought him to the hospital. And that's probably the moment where where he decided, or he knew that was the end of the rope for his addiction, because that was rock bottom at that point. He had almost died. We would have lost him if it had been probably another 2 inches to the left or 2 inches to the right. So at that point, I can continue with.
Well, let me ask you another question, because we had talked about this as well. So one of the challenges that parents have, and you had indicated to me that this was his car, one of the challenges that parents have from a legal liability standpoint is if they know their son or daughter has a problem and they allow them to drive their motor vehicle, that they could be held liable for negligent entrustment of their motor vehicle to their, whether it's an addictive son or daughter, or whether they know the person drives recklessly, some reason why they knew or should have known that the person should not have been operating the car. Very, very important for parents to keep in mind, because, part of, as you're telling this story, I'm thinking to myself, if your son or daughter had asthma, you wouldn't be afraid if you went to a party or a barbecue to say, Johnny or Susie was just diagnosed with asthma. But if your son or daughter is an addict, is addicted to opioids, you're not going to be so opened as to say, Johnny or Susie
100%,
is addicted. So I think there would be some shame component to this, not that there should be, but I think this is something that parents want to kind of hide from their peers or others, because somehow, I think it's just human nature, the parent thinks it negatively reflects upon their abilities as a parent, or what they did as a parent, or what they didn't do as a parent. And maybe you could talk a little bit about what that whole thing feels like or looks like, or how it plays itself out.
Well, I agree with you 100%. This addiction is a shame-based disease. And I think parents feel, okay, well, I must have done something wrong, or I didn't know about it. I was negligent. But getting to like insurance companies, they prey on the fact that it's a shame-based disease, and people are not going to fight them when they deny insurance because they don't want to come out and start fighting. So I think a lot of the problems in our society is that it has been, I think it's less so now perhaps, but it has been a very shame-based disease, and people are not open about the problem. That, they're not going to go to the next door neighbor and say, oh, yeah, my son's addicted to OxyContin. It's not something you bring up at a cocktail party, Whereas, oh, yeah, my son has asthma. So I think you're 100% right.
We wanted to take a quick break to remind you about our sponsor, findagreatattorney.com. Dealing with the aftermath of an accident or injury can be overwhelming. And the last thing you want to worry about is finding the right lawyer. FindAGreatAttorney.com simplifies the process by connecting you with one of the top attorneys in your area who specializes in your specific type of case. Whether you've been injured in a car accident, suffered a slip and fall, or experienced medical malpractice, FindAGreatAttorney.com has a network of experienced lawyers ready to help. And remember, their service is completely free, so you can focus on your recovery without worrying about the cost of legal representation. If you or someone you know needs legal assistance, don't hesitate to visit FindAGreatAttorney.com and let them match you with one of the best lawyers in your area for your needs. And I think what's interesting is that you are the classic example of the great parent. I mean, you were telling me that you coached Little League and you did all kinds of activities and you went skiing and you went away. You were the parent that was there, that nurtured their son, and that you also have a background in medicine. So these things would be more apparent to you than they would be to me as far as some kind of addictive behavior.
Well, theoretically, yes. I thought about this many times. Like, I'm a doctor, and I didn't actually see it coming. And how could I not see it coming? And that was kind of like I felt like I was failing in a respect, like, okay, I didn't deal with this appropriately. But as part of medical training, we're not trained in dealing with these things. I think Jeff could probably talk a little bit about that, but I got almost zero training about substance use disorders. We dealt with acute problems when somebody came in with acute alcoholism or was going through DTs or was going through some type of withdrawal from drugs. That's what we were taught to treat the acute problem, but we were never taught, how to deal with the seeing what the problem is before it happens. So
yeah. Also, there's no question about it. Some people just have an addictive personality, and some people are more susceptible to addiction than others.
100%.
And so, like your son, there was no environmental change except that he got a hold of the beer or the alcohol or the drugs, and then his body just absorbed it.
Yeah.
And I think it's a genetic component to it. Some people are more susceptible to abuse, and like Richard said, there was no problem with the family. You were doing everything. You did everything correctly, right? And then this just happens. It's just like it's no different than asthma. Asthma is a great example. Why do some people have asthma? We have no idea. Why do some people have substance abuse problems? We have no idea. We're all different, and that's why it should not be a shame that a kid has an addiction problem. We should just take care of them properly. And that's what I think slowly our society is starting to realize, that this is a medical problem. Another good example is depression. Some people are just depressed. That's a medical problem with chemical imbalance. It's not a family problem. It's not that you are a bad parent. Unfortunately, people just have medical problems, and they needed to be treated with medicines, not throw them in jail or anything like that.
Right. From my son's point of view, so my ex-wife, and if she watches this, she won't mind. Her family had a history of alcoholism. Both her parents, one of her sisters, there was a family history there. And I think that made him more susceptible. And usually, if you look, there is some family history, even though it might not be the immediate family, but in the family there is some issue very often. And so there is a genetic component to this.
Absolutely. And we need to start looking at this as a medical problem, not a shame problem.
Right.
And I think the other thing that's interesting is, as a doctor, it would be easier for you to listen to somebody's situation, and then you could make suggestions based upon the facts. When you're in it, especially if you're the parent of this child and they're doing things and telling you things like, no, I'm okay, or don't worry about it, or I was just smoking a little bit of pot, you want this problem to go away. You don't want to make it bigger than it is. And you're more prone, I think, to want to believe them and just move on to think, hey, it's not that big of a problem, when in fact you might be addressing a patient of yours and saying, no, this is a lot bigger of a problem than you think.
I think you're right. I think a lot of parents want to be friends with their kids, and they don't want to be parents and be enforcing rules. But I think there reaches a point where you're not their friend, you're their parent, and you have to deal with these problems as a parent, and not say, oh yeah, well, if you're just smoking a little bit of weed or just doing this, no, that's not not acceptable in certain situations. So,
and we were also talking about the fact that his behavior got to the point where it was intolerable at home.
Yes,
and you had to make some or take some steps or moves that really involved tough love. And what were those about?
Oh yeah, I mean, there were times where you say, okay, you can't drive your car. We don't want this particular friend over your house. We don't like that particular person. He's clearly not a good influence on you. And he said, well, I don't care. I'm doing this. I'm doing that. And we kicked him out. And we knew where he was. He wasn't homeless, but we kicked him out twice for not obeying our rules. He was still in school, and he still went to school, but he didn't live with us for those couple of week periods. And he came back, and he was a little bit better, but he still had the problem.
And we were talking also about the fact that I have a family member who has challenges in this regard. And the most difficult thing, I think, for a family member is, unless you get buy-in on the part of the person that's affected, there is nothing that you can do to effectuate this change.
Right.
And the story that you told about your son's car accident case was a godsend.
Right.
Because I think that was your rock bottom moment for your son.
Right.
To allow him to open his eyes and say, if things don't change, there could be some very, very significant and dire consequences.
Yes, and I think, when you asked me if I could have done something different or sooner, I could have, but whether that would have been successful before he hit rock bottom, I'm not sure, because he might have said, well, it's not that bad, and he wouldn't have had the buy-in that he had after that automobile accident. So it's the toughest thing that you see in substance use disorder and alcoholism is the individual has to accept the fact that they have a problem. And until they accept the fact that they have a problem, nothing's going to get done. Nothing is going to get done. The first step in AA is I'm powerless over this alcohol. I'm powerless over this drug, and I can't do anything about it. And you have to accept that. And once you accept that, then you can move on. But until you accept that, it's a tough thing. And I've seen many parents struggle with this because the child just was not willing to accept the fact that they had a problem.
And I think the other difficult thing for family members is that although this is your son or your brother or your, whatever person that is related to you, they're not your son or they're not your brother, because it's almost like they act in ways that are so, so injurious to their own health, and there's nothing you can say to get through to them, and it's so frustrating and aggravating, and things that are so clear to you are so obtuse to them.
Right. And this is a family disease. This doesn't just affect the individual who has the drug or alcohol problem.
Great point.
This affects the entire family structure. So it creates marital problems because the parents might not be on the same wavelength. One is, accepting a problem, one is not accepting a problem. And my daughter, as I told you before, was caught in the middle because my son, every time he would screw up, she kind of knew about it. But she was asked by my son Greg, saying, don't tell mom and dad. I won't ever do it again. I'll be good now. And in the beginning, she did that, but then he kept screwing up, and she resented it. And at the end, she hated it. And it took years for them to rebuild their relationship. I mean, their relationship was devastated by this. And plus, ours was too. I mean, it's like you don't trust people after you've been lied to, hundreds of times. You say, okay, now you're going to be good? Why should I believe you now? You've lied to me so many times. So it takes years to rebuild that trust in somebody who's going through recovery.
And as parents, and we've all been through this, that, we have different parenting styles. So the mother might parent one way, the father might parent a different way. I remember I had this discussion with my mother years ago about something she was doing. And the question is, was she helping or was she enabling some type of bad behavior? And she said to me, you will never understand because you're not a mother. Mm-hmm. And there's, I think, a special relationship between a mother and a son or a daughter, and they'll want to do things in the kindest, gentlest, most caring and loving way because of that special relationship. And when the father comes in and wants to do something more harsh, it creates these loggerheads. Yep. And if the father wants to do something and insists upon doing that something and it doesn't work out, it just creates more fuel for this constant fire of how do we fix this problem?
Right. I must say that in my particular situation, it was the opposite. I think my wife was tougher and I was the softie. So, and she was right in the beginning, and I was more accepting of the behavior. So I think it's not always the mother who's the softie. It depends on the parent. So.
Yeah, is there any? I was just thinking through this conversation, and is there anything you can do to get buy-in earlier before something bad happens?
I've been asked this by many parents over the years, and that's always the question: how do we get them to accept it? How do we get him into treatment? When do people finally see the light? And I don't think there's an answer to that. I wish I had an easy answer for you.
No, I agree with that. I
mean, all my two kids, and I probably, I don't know about your children, they went through this program called, it was a program when they were
DARE?
DARE. Right. They went through DARE when they were in elementary school, and they showed them all the problems with drugs and alcohol, showed them wrecked cars and what happens to people. They all went through DARE. The kids all knew that they shouldn't be using that, but yet we have a drug problem that's worse than ever, right? So I'm not sure what is the answer to the problem.
And then the other thing, which is interesting, I know in Ridgefield they used to have at least a questionnaire that they would ask in the beginning of the year of the high school students. How many of you, drink alcohol at least once a week? How many of you get drunk at least once a month? How many of you smoke marijuana? How many of you have tried heroin? And I think some of the kids at least think it's a joke, and they put on there, yes, I do heroin. And then when the results of this come out, there is this, this hellfire, this hellstorm about all of these challenges that are going on within the school system. But even though they do that, I still think that there are so many challenges with the ease in which you can get drugs, the allure of doing drugs, the peer pressure involved in doing drugs. And like you said, it's an epidemic.
It's an epidemic. And I think now with fentanyl, it's really scary because, the fentanyl they're lacing, marijuana with fentanyl now. Wow. And all you have to do is smoke, a joint and you could die because they put too much fentanyl in that. So, and then these people get addicted to fentanyl very quickly. And so that's, that was not around when my son had the problem, thank God, but it's a huge problem now.
And why don't we talk about how he got better and what turned the corner for him?
Sure. So after his automobile accident, we went to the emergency room. I called crisis intervention, which, I'm a doctor at Denver Hospital, and here I'm asking crisis intervention, which was like, you need crisis intervention? Yes, I need crisis intervention. This is a crisis, right? And I did get help from the people there, and they got him admitted to Silver Hill Hospital for 5 days. We had to stop at a dentist first because he had knocked out his 2 front teeth, and they had to do an emergency root canal because I guess apparently you could be in a terrible pain once you knock out your 2 teeth and the root is exposed. So we did that. We went to Silver Hill Hospital, and then from Silver Hill Hospital, we were fortunate enough to get into a rehab in Pennsylvania, a wonderful rehab, which was a 28-day program. He was at first reluctant. Oh, I don't want to go there. I don't want to do this. And basically, he was only 17, so he couldn't totally refuse. So we were lucky at that point. Second of all, I said, listen, Greg, the police are going to search your car. I'm sure you have drugs in your car. They're going to charge you with dealing. It would look much better if you voluntarily went to a rehab when this all comes down. And that he accepted. He said, yeah, that makes sense. I'll do that. They never searched his car. They never charged him with anything, which I don't know why they didn't, but it was clear that he was impaired, and I'm not sure why they didn't do that. But anyway, they never did. But then he went to this rehab place, and at first he was very, defiant, and, he didn't have a problem. But after about 10 days, something happened. And I think 10 days is about the time where all these drugs get out of your system. And he realized that he was full of crap, that he had been lying to everybody, including himself, that, well, what am I doing, And from that moment on, he's been nothing but, amazing in terms of his recovery. And he has not had a drink or a drug since that day of that accident. And
that's a miracle.
That's been 22 years.
Wow.
So
we also talked about the fact that you had some challenges with your health insurance company. You submitted the bills for this rehabilitative care, and those bills were denied.
Right.
And then you went through an appeal process.
Right. So what happened was at this particular rehab, you have to pay up front. They don't, they say, okay, we'll submit it to your insurance company, but we're not going to wait for your insurance company to make a decision. You have to pay. So we had to pay $12,000 up front. Fortunately, he was supposed to go to college in September. This happened in July. And we had money to pay tuition, and so we just gladly paid the $12,000. But subsequently, we found out that our insurance company only approved 3 days of that 28-day program. And they kept saying, well, he wasn't suicidal, he wasn't a harm to himself, he was medically stable, and that's why he could have been treated as an outpatient. Well, okay, wait, let's go back. He was in an outpatient, he flunked out of the outpatient, he almost died in an automobile accident, and you're telling me that after 3 days he's good to go, right? That was their argument. So I kind of said, okay, it's not worth it. And then after the rehab, my son went to a halfway house. Halfway houses where people in recovery live communally, and they go to meetings, and they get jobs, and they all have different tasks to do in the house, cleaning the toilets, making dinner, things like that. And he went to a halfway house with adults. He was 17, but they said he was mature enough that he could go with adults, which was, I think, one of the best things that happened to him, because here he was with 40, 50, 60-year-old guys whose lives had been totally disastrous. They had been divorced 3 times. They couldn't hold a job. They had been in jail. And here he was, and they say, hey, kid, you are so lucky. You can learn from us and not do what we did. And so I think that was a good thing. But when I went to visit him at the halfway house, he said, hey, Dad, did they ever pay for the stay at the rehab place? I said, well, they only paid for 3 days. He said, well, you should appeal. I said, really? He said, yeah, he's the one who told me I should appeal. I said, yeah, you're probably right. He said, I know somebody that appealed and they got some money. So I said, okay, I'll appeal. So it was a big process. I had to get his records from the hospital. I had to get his records from the rehab place, which was really difficult because it was Pennsylvania and they have all these, privacy laws about getting these records. It took me months to get the records. I got the records. I wrote up this whole thing. I did a timeline, and I sent it to the insurance company, and they denied it. No good reason. They denied it. And then they said, but you have another level of appeal. You can do a hearing. So I said, okay, I'll do a hearing. So again, I had to prepare for this hearing, but they didn't give me any kind of, idea about what the hearing was like. I thought I was going to go there and people were going to ask me questions. That wasn't what happened. I walked onto their campus. It was in Shelton, Connecticut. They had a beautiful campus. It looked like a college campus, and everybody had these beautiful offices with fountains and everything.
Paid for by all the policyholders with claims they had denied wrongfully.
Exactly. So they brought me into this conference room, this long mahogany table with like 8 people, professional people, sitting there, and they told me, you sit over there at the front and tell us why we should cover this. Now, I was able to do that. I'm a doctor. I was not intimidated by these people, but can you imagine the average Joe going in front of a group like this and trying to, talk to them about why they should overturn this denial? Anyway, I gave them the whole scenario. At that point, my son was already at the University of Colorado, doing great. I think he had a 3.8 average, sober. He had started a local AA program on the campus. And he couldn't come because he was still in school. He was in Colorado. And so I said, look at what this rehab did for him. And then, I say, if this was any of your children, would you ever deny that care to them? And I was sure when I left that, okay, that was a slam dunk. They're going to overturn this denial. 2 weeks later, I get a letter, denied. For the same reason. He could have been treated as an outpatient. It was garbage.
But eventually they covered it.
No, they didn't cover it because I had a third level of appeal. He said, if you still want to appeal, you have to go to the state insurance commission. So I said, okay, I've gone this far. I'm going to the state insurance commission. And again, they had different type of information that I needed to give them. And I got all my information together. I sent it to them. There was no hearing or anything. And they overturned the denial. So the insurance company had to pay.
So that's the world that I live in. I practice personal injury law, and frequently insurance companies deny claims. And the question becomes, what paragraph on what page states that this is not covered? And as a layperson, you can get answers that way. And if you get to a point where it's a significant expense, I would say to you, you should at least consult with the lawyer just to find out where you are in this whole process.
Sure.
But it's amazing, and I think it has to do a lot with the fact that you are so learned in that you're a doctor, so that you could go in there and argue a case much better than the average person could.
I think 100%, and I think even getting to the first level of appeal is like overwhelming, and like,
sure.
okay.
And most people quit after the one, not the two, not the three.
They would quit right away, and that's what the insurance companies hope for, that, okay, there was a book by Grisham, right? That, the insurance company deny every claim right as the first time, and then, you have to appeal it. So
let's talk about, the good news. Your son, I think you said 22 or 23 years sober, mm-hmm. and what's he doing now?
So from the time that he went out of the rehab and the halfway house, he came home, and there's something in AA, and he was, a member and still is a member of AA, and I'm not promoting necessarily AA. There's other great organizations that people can get sober with, like church groups and things like that, but AA says, when you're first go through recovery, you should go to 90 meetings in 90 days. And he did. He went to 90 meetings in 90 days, and he started becoming more active in the program. I remember the first meeting or two that he went to, there was this truck driver. This meeting was at Sandy Hook. There was this truck driver, big, strong guy, and he saw Greg come in, and this young kid, and he said to Greg, he said, "Okay, kid, you're going to be in charge of the coffee. You're going to make coffee, and if you don't come, we're not going to be able to have coffee." So that got him to come to the meetings. But that's the way you have to get people to come. So he became more and more involved. And in AA, there's not only local meetings, but there's more, county meetings and statewide meetings. And he started going and becoming more and more active in AA, more politics a little bit. And he started making videos of people in recovery. And somehow he got invited to the state in Hartford, and he met a woman who was also in recovery and also was very involved. And they started an organization called Connecticut Turning to Youth and Families. And I was on the board of that organization. It was a great organization trying to connect people, families, and adolescents to programs and help, because people are struggling with this type of thing. So we had this organization. Unfortunately, over 3 or 4 years, funding was just a major issue. And we worked a lot with volunteers, but when you're working with young people who are between the ages of 18 and 28, they can't volunteer a lot of time. They have to go to school, they have to make a living, so adults, a little bit easier. But anyway, we ran out of funding, and the organization had to be disbanded. But in the meantime, he decided to make a documentary film. And he came up to us one day and he said, "Hey, listen, I want to make this documentary film." And we said, "What are you going to make it about?" He said, "It's about recovery." And he said, "Well, what is it going to be about?" He said, "I'm not sure yet, but I'm going to line up people for interviews across the country, people that he had met through his various connections now with his organization, and I'm going to interview these people, and I'm going to come up with a documentary movie. I'm going to need to borrow some money. I'm going to need to borrow your SUV. I'm going to hire a videographer and a sound guy, and we're going to travel and do all these interviews." So we said, fine. He also did a GoFundMe thing back then. I didn't even know what GoFundMe was. That was at the very, very beginning of GoFundMe. And you had to have a goal of a certain amount in a certain amount of time. So his goal was make $80,000, I think, in 2 months or something like that. And he made a video and had it on the website, and he got $125,000.
Oh my God!
For GoFundMe. So he got money from that. We lent him money, and so he comes back to Connecticut, and he has hours and hours of interviews, and he has to put it together to make some type of cohesive film. And he hired an editor, who he said he's a good editor. I'm not really as good an editor as he is. And they made this full-length documentary film called The Anonymous People. And The Anonymous People has become a staple of recovery in the recovery movement. They show it very often at rehabs the first week or so. And he won an award for the movie in 2014 called the Prism Awards for Best Documentary Film in its class. The Prism Awards are given to subjects that deal with, whether it's books, TV shows, film, that deal with mental health and addiction. And so he won.
That's amazing.
I mean, he was in a group with Oprah Winfrey was one of the producers of one of the other films. Wow. And he won this movie. Anyway, The Anonymous People is a movie basically about recovery and the fact that there are 23 million people, at least, back in those days, maybe there's more, who are in long-term recovery. What that means is that they've been free of drugs and alcohol for about 5 years. I think the definition might be different for different people, but they are in long-term recovery. But nobody knows about them, or nobody knew about them. They're like anonymous. They don't talk about it. And part of the reason that they don't talk about it is because a lot of people were, got sober in AA, and AA is supposed to be anonymous, but it's not supposed to be anonymous for an individual. You can come out and say, I'm in recovery. You just can't say, I go to a meeting in Sandy Hook and Joe Schmo is with me. You can't, say that. So the whole point of the movie was for people to come out publicly and say, I'm in recovery, and then to put pressure on government agencies to change the laws so that there'd be parity in treatment for drug addiction and mental health. So that was the whole purpose of the movie.
That's incredible. So as our time together is drawing to an end, I just wanted to ask you in closing, what thoughts would you or could you share with other families that are experiencing this similar type of situation?
It's a very difficult situation. I think the first thing that you have to deal with is accepting the fact that your son or daughter or brother or sister or anybody in your family has a problem, and basically accepting that, confronting it, and see if they are amenable to treatment. Because if they don't accept it, there's nothing much you can do. Maybe with a child a little bit more, but certainly not an adult. And then the issue of getting somebody into treatment, I think, is difficult because it's still kind of like the Wild West out there for rehab programs. Some of these programs are just not very good, and they're out for money. And you have to be very, very careful about rehab programs. I think we don't have any government oversight on rehab programs, as opposed to like hospitals. They have to be credentialed, certified, nursing homes, those types of things. But for rehabs, there's very little. I think there's some voluntary organizations that you can belong to and say, we're certified by this agency, but it's voluntary. And so if you Google rehab, you're going to get a bunch of results that there might not be, very good programs out there. So you have to be extremely, extremely careful. There is a government agency, a Connecticut agency, Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse, that I think people can contact. They have people that might help them connect to a reputable program or reputable providers. Talk to your primary care doctor, your pediatrician, if they know of programs. Get people involved in outpatient programs, but they have to be reputable. So,
Dr. Marty Williams, an amazing story with a very, very happy ending. And I know it's difficult to speak about topics like this, but I'm sure that there will be somebody listening to this whose life will be affected in a very positive way.
I hope so. And I think in part, there's hope. And this is a chronic, recurring disease. And people shouldn't give up hope, even though people have relapses. They need to keep their hope up.
Thank you very much. I think this is a great example about our goal. Our goal at Justice in Scrubs is to educate our listeners and to empower them to take care of their problems and issues. So thank you. This is a great example about educating our listeners what to do.
No, you're welcome.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure. I enjoyed it.
Thanks so much.